Great. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you very much for joining our office hours webinar. We'll introduce ourselves real quick and then we'll get started. So my name is Anna Heck. I'm an apiculture extension educator. Megan, you want to go next?
I'm Megan Milbrath, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Entomology at Michigan State University.
Great. Zach, then Dan.
Hi, I'm Zachary Huang. I've been at Michigan State University for almost 25 years, and I study bees and do some extension also.
Dan Wines, I'm a specialist in entomology at MSU. We're doing colony health assessments and evaluations for primarily medium and large-scale beekeepers around the state and country.
Great. Well, thanks for being here. Let's see. So this is an MSc extension program. Our programs are open to everyone. So tonight I'm going to get us started with talking about resources and staying connected. Then we're going to talk a lot about queen issues and queen questions. After that, Megan's going to talk about late season nucs. Dan will talk about pulling honey. We'll talk about varroa mites, and then we'll have plenty of time for answering your questions. So I'll get started with resources and staying connected. So if you're watching live, there is the chat box in the Zoom menu, and that's where we are posting the links that we're sharing tonight. If you are watching this as a recorded YouTube video, we will put the links in the description box of the YouTube video. And so just a reminder to everyone that we do have a YouTube channel. It's called the Michigan State University Beekeeping YouTube channel. And we post some of our past webinar recordings to this site. We did post our May Beekeeping Office Hours webinar. So if you missed that one and want to catch up, you're welcome to check that recorded video out. All right. So we want to give a quick shout out to our Michigan beekeeping clubs. It's a lot of times when people have questions or want to learn more about beekeeping, it's really helpful to have local information and local people you can connect with. So the Michigan Beekeepers Association's website, michiganbees.org, has a list of Michigan bee clubs. We're pretty lucky in Michigan. We have over 30 local bee clubs, and many of them meet monthly and work really hard to support new and intermediate beekeepers, and even, working with all levels of beekeepers to help them really succeed and do well in their beekeeping. All right, our website is pollinators.msu.edu. That's for the Michigan Pollinator Initiative here at Michigan State University. We post our upcoming events to our website. So if you go to the events tab, you'll find a list of upcoming events. You can also find that events page by going to the shortened bit.ly link or the QR code on the screen. All right, so this webinar tonight is part of a monthly series of webinars we've been doing during the beekeeping season. Our next webinar will be on July 24th. After that, we have webinars on August 28th and September 18th. They're at 7 p.m. Eastern on Mondays. So you can join us again for future webinars on other seasonal beekeeping topics. We have been hosting several different beekeeping workshops this year. We just had some excellent workshops on campus. We did a workshop on hygienic testing and on queen rearing. We do still have some upcoming workshops, especially for people who want to learn seasonal management topics, hive handling, colony inspections, how to monitor for varroa mites. And so you can find those workshops on our events page. A couple other events we want to highlight. We will be at the Michigan Honey Festival, which this year is Saturday, July 15th and Sunday, July 16th at the Shiawassee County Fairgrounds. So that'll be a fun event. It's an event for all ages. There's lots about honey and honeybees there. So if you're there, feel free to come and say hi to us. We are also going to host a Bee Palooza event here on campus. So that will be Sunday, August 13th in the afternoon in the MSU Horticulture Gardens. And this is really a celebration of lots of different kinds of bees. There's lots of different educational information for all ages. So we hope you can join us if you're around our area. And then finally, if you want to receive regular emails about our upcoming events, you can sign up for our newsletter digest by clicking Stay Connected on our website. And then there you'll find a list of MSU extension topics. We are the pollinators and pollination topic that you can sign up for. We also have the QR code or the shortened link on the side of the screen. And you can choose lots of different extension topics to sign up for. All right, so we're going to have a lot of time to answer your questions tonight. If you're watching this live, the best way to ask your questions is through the Q&A box in the Zoom controls. And so there you'll be able to post your questions and we will get to it, if not during the webinar, at the end. So we have lots of time set aside for questions. All right, and if you don't get your question answered tonight, or if you have questions that come up before the next webinar, the best way for you to ask them is to use the Ask Extension form on our website. This works much better for our team than sending us emails. So the way you use this form is by going to our website, clicking questions, and then you'll find an Ask Extension form where you can type out your question. And one thing that's really helpful is that you can attach photos. So if you're asking a question that's along the lines of what is going on in my hive, it's really helpful if you can include some photos of whatever you're seeing. All right, so I'm going to leave that poll open, but we're going to jump into our next question or next topic, which is sorting out queen issues or answering queen questions. I think that topic got a little messed up. But so just to kind of recap of what we want to see in a colony inspection, we want to see eggs that look like this. They're laid by a queen. We see one egg in a cell. They're kind of centered and on the foundation. So this is typically what we're looking for when we want to see if the colony is queen right. It's not going to get easier to see eggs than looking at this photo on the screen. It can be very difficult depending on your vision, but this is ideally what we want to see. But this is, it's very common to have queen issues. Megan wrote an excellent article called Help, I Need a Queen. The URL is on the screen, and then we can also put the link in the chat. But it really walks you through the different queen issues that are going on in colonies and what people, how people can address or resolve them. One thing I really like about the article is it has this really helpful timeline. I think it's very, very common for beekeepers to have a situation where their colony goes queenless, either because they accidentally squished a queen or because the colony swarmed. And then it feels like the colony should be back on track sooner than it actually is. And so beekeepers go digging, they open up their hives, and it's too soon, and you're maybe disrupting a virgin and queen and making things worse. So this timeline is really helpful so that you have a realistic idea of after, you know, a colony goes queenless or after a colony swarms, how many days you need to wait before you'd actually be in a position where you might find eggs in the colony from a new queen. Anything you want to add there, Megan?
I think, well, the reason that that article is titled that way is because there was a year that I was getting a bunch of calls for people who wanted queens because I was selling queens. And I would go out to their yards instead of just selling them a queen to look at what was going on, because I was never having that many queen issues. And 100% of the people whose houses I went to visit actually didn't need a queen. It was either, in almost all cases, the colony had gotten nectar bound and the bees were requeening and they weren't able to see eggs, but they were somewhere in this process. So that was what prompted me to write this article, was that everybody that I was talked to was just peaking too early. And someone this week said they were going to make me a t-shirt that just says, quit digging in there because you're looking too early, because that is usually the case. And then the other case is that people were having laying worker issues, which we'll talk about too. But there's almost never a situation in which you need a queen. Usually it's fine and the bees are working it out.
Awesome, thanks. All right. So for laying workers, normally this is a situation that happens because the colony for some reason is unable to raise a new queen, or the new queen doesn't come back after her mating flights, and the colony lacks queen and brood pheromones. So the workers, when there's not queen pheromones and brood queen pheromones and brood pheromones present in the hive, the workers can begin laying, and they can, since the workers can't mate, they can only lay unfertilized eggs. So all those unfertilized eggs develop into drones. And so this is a photo on the right where we can see in the cells, there's many cells that have many eggs in them. And that's one of the telltale signs of laying workers, that they will sometimes lay lots of eggs in a single cell. They'll also sometimes lay eggs on the cell walls. But here, this is kind of a good example where we see there's some cells that look reasonable, where it looks like there's maybe just one egg kind of centered in the combs, but we also are seeing several cells that have many eggs in them. And so again, that's a sign that the colony has laying workers. And then here's a photo where we can see this, this cell size is the right size for raising worker brood, but there's drone larvae in here. So there's some cells where we see multiple eggs or multiple larvae in the cells. And then we see that when some of those brood have developed, there's drones in worker size cells. And so they look kind of puffy, they puff out quite a bit. And so this again is a sign that we have laying workers in our hive. There's another photo here of drone brood in worker size cells from laying workers, and then many cells that have lots of eggs in them. All right, so what can you do with laying workers? And I will say this is a really common beekeeping thing to experience. So it is very common to have laying workers. It's not uncommon. It also doesn't mean that you really messed up as a beekeeper, because it's just sometimes it happens. Sometimes the colony tries to raise a new queen. The new queen doesn't return. And by the time you're actually able to check to see if new queen's laying, you might instead find that you have laying workers. And it is a pretty easy issue to deal with. So the two ways that we'll normally deal with it are using newspaper to combine the colony with a strong colony, using newspaper to combine the laying workers with a strong colony, or shaking out the bees in the bee yard. So I have some photos of the newspaper combination, but for shaking out bees in the bee yard, that works well if you have, hives in your bee yard. You just shake the bees off them. And then we normally put those brood frames still on top of another hive, just so that they can get maintained and you're not having brood that's exposed to pests or other issues that you're trying to store. There's some other ways that people will talk about trying to deal with laying workers. One is adding frames of brood each week, which is really, as Megan and I were talking about before, like just kind of so this is not a method that we recommend, because it's basically just a really slow version of trying to combine with a strong colony. It can take weeks or months, and it still doesn't even necessarily work out. And then the other option that's not an option for you is adding a new queen. So once a colony has gotten to the point where it's laying workers, they are not going to accept a new queen. And a lot of people really want to add a new queen because they recognize that their colony is queenless and they want to buy a queen to introduce to it. But the bees will not accept a new queen at the point when they are laying workers. And so you'll end up buying a queen that is killed by the bees. So just adding a new queen isn't an option. Megan, anything you want to talk about here?
Well, I think this is the main reason that we recommend that people start with 2 or 3 hives. I had 2 people this week contact me, and they only had 1 hive in their yard. And if you have a laying worker hive and you only have 1 hive, there's really, your other option is just to euthanize it, because genetically that colony is dead. Whereas if you have another hive, you can always recombine it. And then if you decide that you want to go back to 2, you can always make a proper split later, rather than trying to bring that laying worker back for the dead.
Right. Yep. Thank you. So here we have a photo of a newspaper combination. And I'll say I do newspaper combinations all the time, and they almost always work out really fine, like where the bees just accept each other, and it's an easy, quick way to resolve laying workers. So here in this case, the bottom box, the green box, is a colony. So it's a single deep colony with a queen, that's queen right. And the box on the top was a box of laying workers. So from a laying worker hive. And I use a single sheet of newspaper in between them. Some beekeepers like to do some tears in them, some don't. I normally do a few tears with my hive tool in the newspaper just to get them started a little bit, but that's optional. But one thing that can really be important is having an upper entrance. So in our case, we have an auger hole on this top box, which is important because if it's hot and you put the bees above newspaper and they don't clean out the newspaper quickly enough, some of the bees in the top box can overheat or suffocate. So it's good to have an upper entrance, especially when it's hot. You can also just prop the lid open a little bit. You don't have to drill your holes into your boxes if you don't want. Another point I wanted to share is that, if you have a colony that's laying workers, and say they're 2 or 3 deeps, you can put, one of each box of laying workers onto a different hive. So you're not creating these huge towers. And then the bees will clear out the newspaper. So this is the result of a different combination using newspaper. And you can see from the photo that there was a sheet of newspaper. The bees cleared off all of the newspaper that was in between the 2 boxes. And they left this room that was outside where they could get to. And that's just how they they are able to combine. So the point of the newspaper is that it allows the laying workers and the queen right colony to slowly get used to each other's scents while they're cleaning out the newspaper. And so that's something that can help them, you pretty easily deal with laying workers. Then the bees will start reusing that drone comb normally for worker brood. So normally I'll do this anytime I have laying workers. Megan, do you want to share your experience in doing it with a small laying worker box?
Yeah, and I do end up with lots of laying worker colonies because I do a lot of mating nukes, and a lot of, they work out most of the time and some of the times they don't. And so if I have a small colony, as Anna mentioned, one way is just shake them out. But the other thing that I do is just combine them without using the newspaper. And when I decide to use newspaper is if the laying worker colony is close to or bigger than the colony that it's going to, the queen right run. So if I have a queen right nuke and I have a pretty big laying worker colony, then I'll for sure use newspaper. But if I've got like 5 frames of bees and a full size colony, I just put the box right on top and move on. So my dealing with a laying worker colony takes about 6 seconds. And then, like I said, then if I decide I want another colony, I get a new queen and make a new one.
Great. And I know sometimes people really do want to have a certain number of colonies in their yard, or they don't want their hives to be too many brood boxes, but this could be just one initial step where you're combining them. And then sometimes there's opportunities to split later if you want to get back to a certain number of hives or a certain number of hive bodies per box. Ken, did you want to say something?
There's a question in the chat regarding how long it takes to remove the newspaper. It always is surprisingly quick to me. It's a matter of a day or two, maybe 3 days tops, and they're going to have every little scrap of it chewed. But if you check in 24 hours, it's going to be a large hole where the bees are concentrated. So just a day or two is all it takes.
All right. Great. And just kind of a reminder that we do have laying workers, it's multiple workers in a colony that are laying fertilized eggs. And this is kind of a nice way to deal with them. Here's another example where we did a newspaper combination. And I just kind of have this up here. So I can't exactly remember the numbers, but I can't remember exactly what was going on here. I think we did have a deep super for some reason. But just as a note, if you do have supers on, normally what I do is I'll just kind of bounce the bees out and then put the supers on top. So you don't have to really stress about if you're having a queen right colony on the bottom box and then a box of laying workers, you can still put your honey supers back on top of that hive. All right, so next we're going to turn it over to Zachary to talk a little bit about drone layer queens.
So when you see something like this, what you notice is you have a frame of worker cells, and then suddenly you have a mixture, sometimes almost all drones. So you have them capped taller, but those are worker cells. I think this one can tell it's a worker, capped as a worker, but all those here are capped as drones. So this could be due to 2 different reasons. One is that laying workers, that because when workers become laying, they initially, even though there was a study showing they initially will prefer drone cells, but eventually they run out because the drone cells in the colony, in the natural nest is about 20%. So in the managed colony, it's probably less than that. So you just have patches of drone here and there. So then eventually they will just lay randomly in worker cells. But the second reason you see this is because there's what's called a drone layer or a drone laying queen. So the queen started laying eggs in worker cells, but those eggs are not fertilized. So what could be the reason for that? That could be 3 different reasons. One is that the queen ran out of sperm. The average number of sperm cells stored in the spermatheca is about 5 million. So I just did a quick calculation just now. So 2,000 eggs per day, some say up to 3,000. So it's approximate. 2,000 eggs per day times, in Michigan, would be 365 days divided by 2 because winter here is shut down And then so that becomes 355,000. And then at times 10. Anybody know why I times 10 now? Because you can't answer me because so I just want to give you a minute to think. So that 10 is average number. Let's say it's about 6 to 10. So when the queen is releasing the spawns, she doesn't just release one because that's difficult to do. So the net range is about 6 to 10 sperms per egg when she's laying a fertilized egg, when she intended to lay a fertilized egg. So that's why I timed 10. So that becomes 3.6 million per year. So divide that by 5, you can see it's only 1.5 years. So that's why you don't want to have your old queens run too much longer than 1.5 years. And there's a chance to become drowners. Of course, if you're lucky, you could get them run for 2 years. But the second reason is that bad mating weather, and the queen made it only a few drones. Even though the average number of sperm per drone is actually 5 million, but because of the mechanics, the hydronics, so the queen actually only takes about 1/10 of each drone's sperm. So let's say it's really bad weather in Michigan, and you're trying to raise queens early in April, and it has those cold nights and rainy days. So the queen only had 2 days to mate instead of 5 or 6 days to mate. And during that 2 days, she was only able to mate 2 or 3 drones per day. So in the end, she mated 6 drones. So 6 drones was 5 million per drone, but 10%, so it's 0.5 times 6, that's 3 million spawns. So it's half of the full capacity if she made it only with 5 drones. So then she will run the sperm much faster than the 5 million shown before. A third reason is actually I found that the hard way. One year I was installing package bees, and it was a cold night. It was probably about 25, 28 at night. And one yard I released the queen right away. And another yard I didn't do it. I just used a nail to punch through the sugar was a hole, and that usually takes a day or 2 for the workers to chew their way and release the queen. So then it was cold. For some reason, the workers did not cluster around the queen cage, and those queens get chilled. Then the queen looked fine, but then almost half of that yard I had they become drone layers right away. So I know that's not because of mating, because two different yards, one released right away and they're all fine, 100% fine. And here in another yard, I didn't release them. It's about 50% of drones become drone layers. 50% of queens become drone layers in the next month. So I know something weird was happening. So now actually, I think somebody actually studied that paper came out. I don't remember who, to show this is actually the case. So if you put cool queens, the spawn in the spermatheca could get killed, but the queen herself, it's fine. So you don't see any obvious deformity or behavioral differences. It's just she didn't know the spawns are dead. So spawns are 50% dead. She's trying to release 6 to 10 spawns, and half of those are dead. So then a lot of them become unfertilized eggs, even though she intended them to be fertilized eggs. And you end up with drones in worker cells. So that's the 3 reasons I could think about why would you have drone nairs. The only way to deal with that is just squash the queen, either let them raise their own replacement, which is of course a little bit risky because you have 50% of the brood there are drones, and actually workers are not very good at teasing when the larva is too young. Workers probably couldn't even tell. So they'll end up raising cells, half of cells are useless. I think the only later, probably fourth day larva, then workers will be able to tell, oh, this is actually a drone, then they destroy it. And it's the same as diploid drones. They could not tell they are abnormal until fourth day, fourth install, which is about the same as fourth day. So a better way is to put a cell there or by a queen and then introduce them to the colony. It's not
Okay.
as bad as a laying worker colony for these drone air colonies. So
Thanks,
that's what
Zach.
I have.
So there is a question in the chat about whether or not long-term banking of queens increases the possibility of having a drone laying queen. And I don't think that it does, because like those three things that Zachary listed, it's not actually related to that. So it's whether or not she really runs out of sperm or has an issue of sperm. That's the big thing. So what I'm going to be talking about is requeening. Yes, Anna's, I can see it just fine. And we're talking about requeening with mated queens at this time of year. And this is one of the things that is really advantageous, and it gives your colony the best chance for this year and for the following up year. And as Zachary mentioned, the best, or like with a queen will generally live about 1.5 years, which means that if you got a package or a nuke or you made a split and you have a queen in the spring, your colony will generally replace it in the middle of the summer, which is why we have all these requests for like, oh, I need a queen and my colony is queenless at this time of year. That is 100% expected and natural that your colony will replace an overwintered or old queen in the midsummer of the following year. And an old queen is a queen that went through a big spring buildup. So if she went through that spring buildup and has laid a bunch of eggs and went where she was laying 1,000 eggs a day, then that's absolutely one where you would want to replace it. If it was a small colony or a package that just didn't really grow yet or wasn't taking off, then that would be one where she could probably last another year. So one option, as you can see here, you can order in a bunch of mated queens. This is going to mean that you'll have the greatest chance of having each colony you make end up with a mated queen. What I usually recommend is to introduce the queen into a nuke first and then use a newspaper combine to requeen another colony rather than just dropping a queen into another colony. And then I think your other option, oh yeah, and you obviously want to check to see if the queen is alive if you do order queens, to make sure that she made the transport well. And I think the next photo is my favorite way of introducing queens. So the best way to introduce a queen, I think, especially if you have one that's really expensive or one that you really like the genetics for, you're trying to introduce a VSH queen or something like that, is to use these push-in cages. And again, you could do this in a full-size hive after you've removed the old queen, but the best way to do it is to install her in a nuke, get her established, and then you can combine this nuke with a full-size hive. So this is just size 8 hardware cloth. And what you're going to do is put it over a patch of emerging brood. You'll put the queen in there. So you do have to handle or finagle to get the queen underneath there. And you'll put it on there when there's no bees on the frame whatsoever. So she's under there alone. Those little bees will emerge and they'll already like her, and then she can start laying eggs right away, which means that her scent will be over that whole patch. So this is the one that we have the best luck with in introducing her. All right, and then my favorite way to requeen at this time of year is to use queen cells, and there's a couple of reasons for that. First is you do get a break in the brood cycle, and that is really important. We're going to talk about varroa at the end, but that's really important for varroa management, is to manage the brood cycle, or that can be a really useful tool. The second thing is that it's really easy to get local queen cells this time of year. And you know, in the spring, it's hard. We don't have good mating. We don't have good weather for mating. We don't have lots of drones and it's cold. And at this time of year, the bees are just delighted to put out queen cells. And it's really easy to graft and we get really good takes and we get really good weather with mating. And they're just much, much easier to produce. So, Friday night, I grafted 70 queen cells that I have available, whereas making 70 mating nukes are really hard. So it's easy to get local queen cells, plus you get that nice break in the brood cycle. And worst case scenario, 20% of them don't come back. And then you just, make another split, or you can recombine that colony and then you could make another split later if you want to have more hives. But going into and there's how you would put it in, just along into the brood nest. Going into winter with a young laying queen and then coming out of spring with a young laying queen gives you a huge advantage for overwinter survival and then also for whether or not that colony is going to swarm. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is making nukes, which is kind of related because I do all of my requeening kind of in conjunction with making nukes, and I'll put that in the chat. And there's an article that I've done on this. I think the whole thing will go in the chat. And basically, the mentality behind this is to account for your losses. So even if you have a really good mite management strategy, you've got a good beekeeping strategy, you're going to have some losses. All livestock is lost. And so this is my system of making up basically, oops, do you want to go back one? Making up my packages ahead of time. So these are white polystyrene. This is the backs of them. And these are white polystyrene nukes. They're perfectly fine. You can just use a single deep if you want. You don't have to use a special equipment. But around this time of year, so I'm going to start this in mid-July. I'm going to make up a 2-frame of brood, 1 frame of food. So basically a 3-frame nuke. And then I'll put 2 extra frames in each one of these and drop a queen cell in. And then they build up. I overwinter them in these boxes for winter. And then if I lose a colony, I've basically have made my own nukes for the winter. So this is what allows me to be much more sustainable as a beekeeper. And then if I don't need these, I can make them available for sale to somebody who does need them. So I usually make about 10 or 20 every year. And those are just my backups so that whatever my losses are, I can replace them from my own bee yard. So that's one of the reasons. And you can do that. Oops, you can go ahead. There's some animations on this next slide I didn't realize. So if you click forward a little bit. So one option is you can just take a nuke from each hive. So if I had 3 hives in my yard, I can actually do this. I can do my requeening and set up my nuke all in one. And what I can do is I can take that old queen out, put that old girl into retirement, let her overwinter in a nuke, which again, it doesn't have to be in a 5-frame nuke box. This could be just in a single deep or in 2 mediums or something like that. I can keep her as a spare, and then I can just let this colony requeen, or I could drop a queen cell in there, or I can requeen it with a mated queen. The other option is, let's say I'm still making honey production. I can take my small colonies, like at this time of year, I can tell which colonies are making honey and which colonies are not making honey. And I can take all the colonies that don't make honey and break them down into nukes. And again, these aren't ones that are sick. These are ones that are just, a little further behind or haven't made honey. And so I can take, so instead of going into the winter with 3 colonies, I'm going into the winter with 6. And 3 of those will have young queens at least, and that really increases my chances of what I'm doing or what happens to me in the spring. So this is something that I usually give like an hour-and-a-half talk on, and I gave it to you in 2 minutes. So we'll happily answer questions on this topic at the end as well.
Great. And then next up is Dan to talk about ways to pull honey.
Okay, so this is seemingly a fairly happy topic. Hopefully, if you're, it's been a good spring throughout most of Michigan. It's been really warm and dry. That kind of just broke yesterday a little bit, and in a big way today for a lot of the state. But that from mid-May to mid-June being warm and dry, there was a ton of nectar coming in. I saw that in our own bees, and just in talking to beekeepers, pretty happy with spring conditions. So hopefully there's some honey to be harvested. And when we think about harvesting honey, this slide comes up in a lot of our webinars, and it's useful for a lot of different points. But in this context, when we're thinking about harvesting honey, that's our crop. That we have our animal lives in the brood nest, and while the population of bees grows through the year, we stack boxes on that are going to be the surplus that we're going to take. But the reason why we want to be taking honey from the supers, and that that we've put on with the intention of harvesting rather than honey out of the brood nest, there's a couple reasons. One, we want to leave adequate stores for wintering for our bees, and so that's kind of down in the that's the food reserves of the animal itself that is not surplus. But with having supers, treating them differently than brood comb, we want to, it ensures if we feed our bees in the spring, we feed syrup when it's cold and damp and weather is volatile, so we're feeding syrup. That ends up in the brood nest. We're doing that before we're putting supers on the colony, so we're not going to end up with any sugar syrup in our honey. The other is mite treatments. Some mite treatments are restricted to use with using only without supers on. So any residue that's going to end up in the comb, in the wax of the hive, is going to be in that brood comb, and we're not going to risk by harvesting from honey supers, we're not going to risk that contamination from that wax ending up in our supers and bleeding into the honey that we harvest. So that's why it's kind of good to have that mentality of we're separating. You may have a lot of honey in the brood nest, but it's best to just kind of leave it there for the bees, or if it's really becoming a problem, pull it out, like Megan mentioning a nuke. You're going to give that nuke some food, so you can kind of sometimes distribute some of that if you have excess food in the brood nest. But we're talking about harvesting honey from our supers, so there's a handful of ways you can go about that. And how it's ready, it's really simple. Basically, the bees will tell you when it's ready, and they will tell you it's ready by putting a cap on it. They will put wax over the top of it. They've determined that they have lowered the moisture down sufficiently so that fermentation is not going to be an issue. Again, they're putting this away in their pantry for the long term, so they're kind of gauging. They've got the moisture, the numbers kind of 18.5%. Depending on moisture level and the amount of yeast spores in it. If it gets down below that moisture content, it should not ferment. So you as a beekeeper, if you're going to harvest it and extract it, you want capped honey. A frame like this, there's a ton of nectar there. You see they've started capping across the top, but if you extract that, there's a pretty decent chance with it not being capped yet that your overall moisture is going to be higher than that 18%. It could be 19, 20, 21, even if that's fairly thick nectar and doesn't shake out. You could end up with some pretty wet honey. And so unless you're going to consume that almost immediately, if you put that in a container and store it, it's going to tend to bubble and ferment, and then you're going to start it's going to, unless you're trying to make mead, that's not something you want to do. So it really is best to let the bees tell you. There is a little device, I always blank on the name of it, if someone can help me, but it's basically
refractometer. Dan?
Yes, thank you. I want to say refractometer, and you can check the moisture content in your honey if you're questionable at all. You can get a refractometer and check it out. So once you've kind of determined, you've got supers or you've got frames you want to harvest, they're nice and capped, the bees have done what they wanted to do. There's several different options for how you can take that honey. And to take that honey, you essentially need to separate the frames with the honey in it from the bees that are on those frames. So first option, simplest, and if you're small starting out, you've got a couple hives, it's first year, you're not taking boxes and boxes and boxes. Simplest option is you can just pull frames and brush the bees off. If you have a bee brush, you can find some just nice dry long grass and just gently, you don't want to do a full sweeping motion because you'll end up tumbling bees and kind of agitating them, but just kind of a gentle feathery motion and just gently sweeping the bees off. A lot of times it's nice to have if you're using this method, to have like an empty box to work into. So if you're taking a couple frames out of this hive and a couple frames out of that hive, you've got a place to put them. Next option is the bee escape or escape boards. And so what this is, it's a really cool device that I'm not sure the origin of it, but some beekeeper figured out that, bees are good at finding this large hole. So what we're looking at is that on the left is the top. You put this on facing up, and on the right is the underside of it with kind of this triangular, shaped pattern. And what happens is from the top, just in the course of general hive traffic, bees move up and down. They're moving nectar around. They're just doing internal hive tasks. So there's a lot of up and down traffic. What happens is a bee coming down hits this board from the top with a big hole in the middle of it. It wanders around and it says, oh, hey, here's a big hole. Let me go there. I'm trying to go down. That's the way down. It gets down and it gets into that triangle system. And it's kind of these little narrowing passages that steer it out of that triangle. And now it's in the hive below. Now, the reason it works is because it's much harder for a bee trying to go up to find those little small entrances that are at the corner of the triangle. And even if they find that first small entrance, a lot of them are going to get diverted away by that second triangle. So it basically works on the same principle as like a fish trap, where they're it's easy to enter from one way, and then you pass a little bottleneck, and all of a sudden it's hard to find that small entrance on the way back out. So that's the basic idea. This is a design you can find. There are also little snap-in plastic or metal devices that go in, like if you have an inner cover with a little slot cut in it, those are made to have a little snap-in piece. So same principle, it's kind of a one-way, easy to go through one way and hard to go through the other. So this is an escape board installed on the hive. So my intent putting this on is to take those top two supers off, the pink one and the one that's got all the paint flaked off. And then I've left one super underneath it. You see the board's kind of 1.5 inches thick there. I've left that one on because you see it's picture this goldenrod. This is fall. So I'm leaving that for that last honey to come in to harvest at the very end of the season. But basically you put it under anything you want to take, and then anything below that you're going to leave, and that's the hive that's going to carry on as usual. So that's installed. One little caveat with the escape boards is whatever's above them does need to be bee tight, meaning there's no auger holes, there's no rotten boxes with soft corners. You can see that this box is old. It's had a lot of seasons in it. It had some soft corners that weren't bee tight, so I duct taped them up. What happens if there's an entrance there is, as those resident bees in that hive, they find, over the course of a day or day and a half, they work their way down, and all of a sudden you have these 2 boxes of honey sitting on top with no one at home to defend it. And if there's little entrances where bees from other colonies can get into it, they will come and they will rob it. And you'll come back and you'll find either the midst of a robbing frenzy on top of that escape board, or you'll just find empty boxes and a bunch of wax flake. And that honey's ended up in hives next door, and you've got empty boxes that are no longer going to be taken home to be extracted. So that is something you do want to make sure it's bee tight. And again, if you use an upper entrance, if you've got auger holes, you can put a cork in them, duct tape. If you've got inner cover with the little notch that you flip depending on time of year, you definitely want to make sure that is not engaged, so you've got a good sealer on the top. But what's really nice, and typically they clear pretty well in 24 hours. I like working the 24 to 48 hour range for coming back to collect these supers. And one of the side things that is really, and you can see it's cleared out. There might be 1 or 2 bees wandering around, but they really do work well. It's also nice that now when I'm loading all this in my truck, I've got nothing dripping. All that comb that I split apart between the boxes that was full of honey when I put that board in the course of cleaning it up and before they've moved down, they've dried out all those top and bottom bars. So now when I'm lifting off on my truck, I'm not leaving a trail of honey. When I'm moving stuff in the honey house, I don't have all this honey that's draining down from this disrupted comb. They've taken that and they've stored it. So you've kind of got dry boxes to work with, which is really nice. So that's escape boards. The next option available that's pretty commonly used is called fume boards. And what this is again a picture on the left. This would be the bottom side, the underside of it, and the right would be the top side of it. This is for 8-frame equipment. That's what we run a lot of our bees on campus in 8-frame. You can also buy them or make them in 10-frame dimensions, but it's the same length and width as your boxes, and it's got a rigid top, and then it's got felt on the underside, kind of an absorbent material, that white fabric on the underside. And what you do is you put there's a variety of different chemical compounds you put on it. And then the next photo shows it actually installed on the hive. And what the fume board does is basically you're saturating that felt with there's a variety of different chemicals. Butyric acid's common. There's a number of other chemicals, and basically the bees don't like the smell. So when you put that on a hive, that smell drives the bees downward. And so when you put that on and leave it on for a few minutes, basically the bees are just kind of naturally pushed down, and then you pop that fume board off and you have a largely empty box that you can now take away with minimal bees in it. I will say these work well on sunny days. On more overcast, cooler temperature days, they don't work as well. It really does help to have the warm temperatures when you put that scent on those boards. Yeah, the elevated temperatures, I think, kind of increase the reaction on that. So warm sunny days, they work well. The last kind of commonly used option is blowing the bees out of the boxes, either with a little shop blower like this, or large beekeepers will commonly use a backpack leaf blower style. And this is just physically, usually I'll either tip the box up on end, or I'll set it in front of the hive, in front of the landing board, and set it on like an empty box or something, so it's not right down in the grass. And you're just physically going through and blowing each seam between the frames, blowing the bees out on the ground in front of the hive, and they crawl back in. You do want to be a little careful that you don't blow a whole pile of bees out, and while they're crawling back in, you're carrying your honey to the truck or to the garage, and you step on all those bees. So you do kind of want to be mindful where you blow them, not in a high traffic area, because it'll take them 5-10 minutes to kind of orient themselves, and you'll start to see this procession back into the hive. But a blower like this can work pretty well. A lot of times, even if I'm pulling honey with a fume board or an escape board, it's nice to have a blower on hand, because sometimes there's an escape board that jams up, or sometimes, say, weather or other reasons, the fume board just doesn't work that well, or there's, it's pretty well clear, but it's more bees than I want to bring back to the honey house. So having a blower like this to get the last few handful of bees out is kind of a useful tool. So again, I think there's one more picture. Often, yeah, and this, when you've got those other pictures are kind of new comb and they move pretty freely. This is older comb in the supers. And so using a hive tool to kind of index the frames apart so you can open up those seams, because a lot of times, especially if there's some burr comb or brace comb in there, there's a lot of space that you're just not getting a volume of air to. So kind of opening them up, I usually blow from the bottom, just because you've got your top bars are much thicker than your bottom bars, so it's easier to get air moving through from the bottom side.
All right, so next we're going to talk about varroa mites. All right, and so just a reminder to everyone that we keep a lot of varroa mite resources on our website, and you can find that with the URL on the screen, or if you go to our website and then go to the beekeepers page, you'll find a link to a page about monitoring and managing varroa mites. So this time of year, it is really helpful to be monitoring your colonies for varroa mites. The two typical ways of doing that are the alcohol wash or the powdered sugar roll test. The alcohol wash is normally going to be our go-to, and it's a nice test, especially if the bees are on a strong nectar flow. Sometimes if you get too much nectar in the powdered sugar roll test, it can make some of the powdered sugar dissolve and make it harder for that test to be effective. But so anyways, alcohol wash test is a good go-to. If you can't stomach watching a sample of bees die in your sample, then use the powdered sugar roll test. But either way, those should give you a good idea of where your mite levels are as far as your having 300 bees in your sample. We will mention that Megan knows the numbers. We've seen numbers of when beekeepers think that they're collecting 300 bees in their samples, and then people actually go to count out the number of bees. It's really common that people have fewer bees in their sample than they think they have. So that's an important lesson for everyone, to try to make sure you actually get to 300 bees in your sample. You can count them to kind of check yourself to know where you're at. But we have a lot of information on the website about how to monitor for varroa mites and how to make a plan for them. One of our nice guides or tools that we have is the Tools for Varroa Management Guide from the Honeybee Health Coalition. They did come out with a new edition last year, and this goes through all the different treatment and management options that you have available to you. So there are several different options, and in this time of year at MSU, we're looking at mite numbers. We also have treated most of our colonies with a treatment. So many of them got a formic acid treatment, so Formic Pro. A lot of our colonies do have honey supers on and have lots of brood. So when the temperature conditions are right, that's the Formic Pro treatment is an option for us there. But again, if you want to monitor for varroa mites, there's the alcohol wash or the product sugar roll test, and we have lots of videos that show you how to do that. You can also sign up for one of our beekeeping workshops on campus, and we'll walk you through the different steps of monitoring for varroa mites. This time of year, a lot of our colonies fortunately have honey supers on. And so if we're collecting honey for human consumption, we're limited in the number in which treatments we can use. So we can use formic acid treatments, which are going to be Formic Pro or Mite Away Quick Strips. We can use HopGuard 3. So that can be used, but when there's honey supers on, but then you're still not extracting from that brood nest area. And then, or you can use oxalic acid. And so just to really, think about the different conditions. None of our treatments is perfect in every kind of condition. Some of them are really sensitive to temperature. Some of them can only be used, can or can't be used with honey supers on. Some of them need a certain minimum colony population size and are appropriate for really small colonies. So it is really important that you read the label, read the Tools for Varroa Management Guide, and then also our treatments are pesticides regulated by the EPA. So following that label is really important. All right, so there's going to be a program evaluation survey when you close your Zoom window, so you can see that. We are lucky that we have different sources of funding to support lots of different programs. And now we are at the point for answering your questions. So let's jump in. Megan, do you want to start sharing some questions for it with us?
Yeah, and Zachary has been answering the questions. So if you are paying attention, you can look in the Q&A and see the ones that he's already typed answers to. So Dan, there's a couple on honey I think we can start on. So one of them was on using the blower, and how do you get the bees that are hiding behind the sidebars?
Yeah, so usually I go down the seams first, and you can also you can go across the top and bottom, the sidebars. I'm top and bottom because I've got a box up on end. And again, if you're coming from the bottom, you've got that bee space, that 3/8 of an inch clearance between the inner wall of the box and that sidebar. So basically, it's usually I go down the seams between the frames first, and then I'll go across the top and across the bottom. If there's still more bees than you'd like, and at that point, you can leave that box for a couple minutes. And usually those bees, whatever bees are remaining in there, they're going to come up to the top and they're going to cluster. You're going to end up with a couple dozen bees in one of the corners, and then they're easier to blow out when they aggregate themselves in a corner rather than one here and one there and one there. Again, and I guess the other aspect I didn't mention with the harvesting is you do want to be mindful of robbing. Any of this in harvesting honey, it's generally not a problem in the spring and summer, but when you get to late summer, you do want to kind of have that in mind as you're preparing for your harvesting honey. It takes a while to get bees out of the supers, so you want to make sure that they're not getting in faster than you're getting them out with robbing season.
And then while we're still on the honey topic, of when you should use a refractometer to check your honey. If you want to say what you do, Dan, and then we can add if we do other things.
Yeah, we check it post extraction. I mean, we're pretty careful to not, our ratio of capped honey to uncapped honey. We try to have 90+% capped, so that we're pretty sure we're not going to be in that marginal zone. But usually we will check it as we pump it into a settling tank, and so it's whatever is extracted that day is kind of homogenized as one lot. And then whether that's a couple boxes or a couple dozen boxes, and that's going to settle in a tank. And so usually we'll check that in a tank, because we're going to tap off for buckets or into a bottling tank for there, where it's going to be essentially like, finished product. So we want to check that out before we kind of, put it away or consider it done with extraction. That's when we typically do it.
And I'll just add, for refractometers for honey, you want to make sure that the refractometer you buy is for honey. There's some refractometers that are used for other things, I think like home brewing maybe, but they have a different range. So you want a refractometer that reflects the range in honey anything from low percents to high 20%. So just make sure that you get the right kind of refractometer.
And the honey is hygroscopic, means that it picks up moisture from the environment. So unless you're actively drying it, like you have it in a hot room with a fan and a dehumidifier, having open honey will actually get higher in water content over time. So if you are storing it, or especially not storing it sealed, you'd want to check it again before you bottled it. And so someone did have a question. They said, I have a couple of hives die out over winter. They just extracted the honey that was in the supers. Any issue in consuming it? It was 18.5% and seemed okay. Anna, go for it.
All right. So it's really dependent on what you did that hive. So one thing is, did you feed sugar syrup at all to that colony while it was alive? And so if you did, then you might have stored sugar syrup that you're thinking is honey that's actually just stored sugar syrup. A big thing is, did you use any mite treatments that aren't labeled for that kind of use? So some of our mite treatments aren't labeled for use with honey supers, and even HopGuard will say that even though you can use it when honey supers are on, you're not supposed to extract from the brood nest area. So that's a big thing. If you treat it with antibiotics, then that you wouldn't want to consume any honey from the brood nest. Another issue that I sometimes see is that sometimes there's mouse nests in dead out hives, and if you had a mouse nest in your area where you're extracting honey from, that would be pretty icky. And so those are the main concerns I would have with consuming honey from a dead out. If none of those apply to you, then you can do that. But I do talk to many beekeepers who want to extract from dead outs, and it can be really hard to extract honey once it's crystallized and to liquefy it in order to crystallize it. So that's why we're normally encouraging beekeepers to extract honey in the fall when it's really clear what honey is used for human consumption. If we do have dead outs, we normally just use that honey for colonies the next year.
Zachary, there were a couple questions. So Zachary answered a couple really good questions about drones and drone workers, but there was one that didn't make it in, and it says, how do you tell a worker cell from a drone cell before the drone cell is capped? Did you want to do that one live?
So yeah, it's hard to tell if you're a first-year beekeeper, but once you have experience seeing, sort of remembering what a worker cell look like. Worker cells are on average 5.4 millimeter.
So there is a varroa question relating HopGuard. I don't want to put you on the spot, Anna, since you just came back in, of how well you know the HopGuard label, but I'll put the label in the chat. The question is, do you treat continuously with using HopGuard? So you could maybe give the general IPM and your experience with HopGuard, and then I just read the label.
Great, good. So we can tag team a little bit here. So you just want to actually read the label and see exactly what it says, and it will tell you, after you put the strip in, how long the treatment is, and then when you should remove it. In general, we recommend that beekeepers rotating treatments. So one of the big issues that we're concerned about is that varroa mites may over time develop resistance to certain treatments. And so one of the ways to help prevent that from happening is by using different types of varroa mite treatments throughout the year. But basically, you wouldn't want to be in a position where you just have HopGuard on the entire season. You want to be following the label, using it for specific treatment periods, and then also considering other treatments as well.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that the sound was a little off, but basically you do want to be rotating treatments and not having them on consistently. According to the label, you can use 2 treatments back to back, which is basically every 2 weeks, but you wouldn't want to use it